All this and more coming up in today's Going Underground, but first straight to a decision made in London by UK authorities in the past 48 hours to refuse any delay in extradition proceedings against the most famous publisher in the world, Julian Assange of WikiLeaks. Joining me is legendary journalist and filmmaker John Pilger, who was at Monday's Magistrates' Court hearing in Westminster. John, what happened in court?
It was one of the most searing events I don't like calling it an event, but it was an event. It was an atrocious event. In this courtroom, presided over by a judge. She's a mere magistrate, actually.
Magistrate,
but
Vanessa
elevated her to judge, in which she said imperiously to Julian Assange, "Have you anything to say?" And he stood. "You stand, Mr. Assange." She was, her dictatorial gestures to this sick man through the whole thing were just disgraceful. And he stood, and his lips moved, and nothing came out. And still nothing came out. And I strained to hear what he was saying. And he said, for 10 years, he said this very falteringly, for 10 years, the superpower has had all this time to prepare a case against me. I am denied the opportunity, and I paraphrase him now, I am denied the opportunity. I can't even have access to my writings, as he calls it. He means the documents.
His defence documents.
His defence documents. He can't see his defence documents. To say it is surreal is not enough. It is truly appalling.
You're saying the judge was biased in favour of the extradition attorney acting for the United States?
Yes. No, she was biased. All the judges have. The previous one, Lady Arbuthnot, whose husband, Lord Arbuthnot, was revealed in WikiLeaks cables to be up to his neck in the national security state and arms companies and so on and so forth. She should have never been sitting on the bench. But this one, her bias was incandescent. I've sat in a number of courts all over the world. I've never seen anything like this. It belonged in a show trial in the 1950s. Moscow, Prague, you name it. And they call, this is London. Do they know what's happened to justice here?
Of course, Stalin's show trials were broadcast. What your
well, this wasn't broadcast. There's no reporting of this.
It didn't make Channel 4 News here.
No, it didn't make, nor the BBC.
It made headlines around the world, but not here in this country.
Deliberately excluded. The most important case, a publisher and a journalist is brought to a court. He is convicted of nothing, charged in this country with nothing. The charges against him are not only concocted, but as his QC pointed out yesterday, the treaty, extradition treaty between Britain and the United States has a specific section in it that says a person cannot be extradited if the offences are said to be political. The 16 of the 17, at least, charges against Assange in the United States are unlawful. They are political. That's not an opinion. That's not a piece of agitprop. They are, under law, political. They're based on a 1917 law called the Espionage Act, which was used to chase down conscientious objectors.
I mean, the media here, in fairness, is more interested, arguably, in this case of an RAF base and the killing of a British teenager. That extradition is interesting. Presumably Lewis, though, in court, was saying, this is our closest ally, and Julian Assange has endangered the national security of Britain's closest ally, let alone the hacking charge, which isn't political, is it?
No, it's not. Yeah, the hacking charge, even the single hacking charge, even the prosecutor in the Department of Justice in the United States is dismissive of their own charge, and that would be thrown out of court. The fact that he repeated the old canard that there is some kind of conspiracy between Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange. They were never in touch. There was no contact. Don't they read the transcripts of the court-martial of Chelsea Manning? They tried again and again to prove a conspiracy that existed between Julian and Chelsea, and there was none.
Was the UN mentioned? Because she seemed unmoved by any of the reports. I'm not sure whether Assange's attorneys and
She
people
not
were.
only unmoved, but she said it's not up to this court to consider the conditions in the prison. That is not what we're here to do today. Why isn't it? Why isn't it? That wasn't. She just dismissed it. You know, the man has been so mistreated. I saw him last Thursday. His spirit had returned in some way because there was something ahead. There was a court case. There was the beginning of the fight. But watching him in court, that spirit had just departed. He's lost almost 15 kilos in weight. He's isolated. When he walks through the prison, the other prisoners are put back in their cells so that he can't fraternize with them. He's only allowed to talk to people in the so-called healthcare, which, as he rightly labels it, is one flew over the cuckoo's nest.
The Guardian newspaper, to which Julian Assange gave WikiLeaks revelations about alleged war crimes, they've previously alleged that he's had meetings that he denies and so forth. I'm not sure they've done it yet, but there are
Meetings with who?
With Donald Trump's former campaign manager, Mr. Manafort, and others.
But that's a fabrication.
Well, they're still up there on the Guardian website.
Yeah.
What if
well,
the
there are a
Guardian
number of fabrications on the Guardian website. The Guardian has played an appendage role to the state in undermining WikiLeaks and everything it represented.
But, of course, there are people in authority, arguably, tweeting, this is Assange faking it in court to try and get off because he can get off on health reasons.
I know you've got to ask these questions, Afshin, but it really, we shouldn't be describing even suggesting that somebody who has been so abused, so mistreated as Julian Assange is faking anything. The courage of this man, the fact that he is, when I ask him how he is, he's always reserved. I'm okay, I'm all right. He always wants to reassure me and reassure others who see him that he's okay, when clearly he's not okay. I know because we discussed on Thursday what he might say in court. And I'm sure that he'd practiced and tried to memorize words, but they couldn't come up. That's how upset he is.
The papers covered, I don't know whether that second paragraph of what he said was quoted in some media.
Yes, they've published excerpts of this. They're saying, said Julian, the journalists and whistleblowers are enemies of the people. They have an unfair advantage dealing with documents. They know the interior of my life with my psychologist. What he's referring to this case in Spain, which has proven beyond doubt that the CIA was running a Spanish company all the time he was in the Ecuadorian embassy to spy on him. Not only just to spy on him, but to spy on his lawyers, on his doctors when they came to see him, on people like me when we came to see him.
The Spanish courts are looking at the allegations of a CIA contractor in Spain bugging you, meeting Julian Assange, Jeffrey Robertson, QC, one of the most famous human rights barristers. But again, Vanessa Baeza, the judge in Westminster Court on Monday, didn't seem to say that any of that is relevant to the fact that proceedings cannot be delayed in reference to his extradition to a grand jury in the United States.
And she gave no argument why. The decision was made simply because the decision had been preordained, set. This is what the state wants, and this is what the state will get, regardless of anything to do with the court, regardless of any defense argument. When it goes to appeal, and it goes out of this wretched strata of injustice called the magistrates' court system and into the High Court.
When does that happen?
That could happen, that could be a long time. It could be sometime near the end of next year. Meanwhile, day after day, Julian endures a maximum security prison where he has no access to proper exercise, no access to proper intellectual stimulus, no access to the people around him. I mean, people who are in there for some really terrible crimes.
Murder.
They have a human social life. That's denied Julian, a journalist.
Well, why do you think? You know journalists, you've been working in journalism for half a century or whatever. Why would anyone in a BBC newsroom, an ITN newsroom say, this is not worthy of even covering on the main bulletin here in England? Because you're talking about it as being this great, important case. They're not interested in this case.
They don't even have to say that. They don't have to conspire to say it. It's absolutely built into a system of media that is an extension of the state, an extension of the established order. Propaganda is, as we've often discussed on this show, is the issue of our time.
Okay, but this time, outside the court, when you left the hearing, you called this country a rogue state.
I was actually referring to the United States.
Right.
Then. But Britain,
Boris Johnson's okay.
No, of course not. But Britain has, in its justice system, there is perhaps a glimmer of hope, as I've just said, when it goes, perhaps there is, when it goes into higher courts. There is no hope in the United States, which is a false democracy. The justice doesn't exist there.
We invite the US Ambassador to London, Ambassador Johnson, John Pilger. Thank you.
Thank you.